My name is Renata Calloway. Everyone calls me Ren. I'm 31 years old. For 26 years, my parents told me I was the slow one, the one who'd never amount to much, while my brother Preston collected honor roll certificates and a corner office. They mocked the way my brain works at every family dinner, left me off every important decision, and paid me less than the interns at our own family company. Then, at my father's retirement gala, in front of 400 guests, a woman I'd never met handed me a folder that would unravel everything my family had built on lies. What none of them knew was that my grandfather had been watching the whole time. And what he left behind was about to hand me a $47 million check and the company that came with it. The Calloways were Midwest royalty, if the Midwest did royalty. My grandfather, Walter Calloway, started with one grain elevator outside Wichita in 1958 and built it into Calloway Grain and Logistics, a company that by 2024 moved product through 9 states and was worth north of $300 million. My father, Marcus, had run it since Walter stepped back in 2010. I was never good at school the way Preston was. Words on a test page never sat still for me. Teachers called it processing issues. My parents called it something else. Renata just isn't built for this. My mother Eleanor used to say, usually within earshot of me. What I was good at, nobody in my family cared to notice. Numbers. Not equations on a page, patterns. I could look at a spreadsheet of shipping manifests and feel when something was off before I could explain why. I could hold 100 moving numbers in my head and see which ones didn't belong. My grandfather noticed. Every other Saturday, I'd ride out to his farmhouse an hour outside the city, and he'd spread ledgers across his kitchen table, real ones, decades old, and have me find the mistakes. Most people read numbers, he told me once. You listen to them. That's rarer than you think. I didn't understand what he meant. I would, eventually. But first I had to survive 15 more years of being my family's quiet disappointment. Thanksgiving 2016. 22 relatives around my parents' dining table, my mother's china out, the good candles lit. My father stood to make his toast. I want to say something about Preston, he began, and the table already knew what was coming. Preston just made regional VP at 26. Youngest in company history. Applause, real applause. Preston did his practiced humble nod. My father's eyes moved down the table to me. And Renata's, he paused, the warmth draining out of his voice, still finding her footing. A few uncomfortable laughs. My aunt patted my hand like I'd been diagnosed with something. I stared at my plate. Under the table, a hand found mine. My grandfather, Walter, sitting beside me. He didn't say a word, but when I looked up, there was something hard and furious behind his eyes. Not at me. At his own son. He never mentioned that night again. But 4 months later, he called me out to the farmhouse and told me he needed to show me something. After I finished community college in 2018, an associate's degree, nothing anyone in my family bragged about, I asked my father for a job at Calloway Grain. He agreed to start me in accounts receivable. Salary, $38,000. That same year, Preston was made a director. Salary, $210,000 plus a company car. My job was entering invoices, chasing late payments, and sitting in a cubicle nobody walked past on purpose. I wasn't in a single strategy meeting in 6 years. But I read everything that crossed my desk. And 3 years in, I started noticing a pattern in a vendor account tied to our Nebraska routes, payments that were slightly too round, slightly too regular, going to a logistics contractor nobody in operations could describe when I asked. I didn't say anything. I just kept a private file. My grandfather had taught me that too. Don't show your hand until you understand the whole table. March 2019, my grandfather's farmhouse kitchen. He was 84 by then, thinner than I remembered, but his eyes hadn't dulled at all. Seat, thing. I sat across from him, surrounded by 60 years of black and white photos, him breaking ground on the first elevator, him shaking a governor's hand. Not one photo of my father running anything. I built this from a shed and a truck, he said. Your father inherited a company. He's never once built one. He slid a small tin box across the table.
Keep this. Don't open it yet.
You'll know when. 18 months later, he was gone. Heart failure. I was the only one at the hospital who stayed past visiting hours. April 2024. An email landed on a Tuesday. Subject: Role consolidation. Confidential. My accounts receivable position was being absorbed into a new department. Effective in 60 days. That night, working late, I heard my parents through the thin wall of the finance floor. "She can't be here when Preston takes over as president," my father was saying. "It looks strange. His sister's still doing data entry." My mother's voice, soft as always when she was being cruel. "We gave her every chance, Marcus. Some people just aren't built for more." I pressed my hand flat against the wall. $38,000 a year. No savings. If I lost that job, I had maybe 6 weeks before real trouble. My father's retirement gala was 2 nights later. The Callaway Grain 40th Anniversary Gala, downtown ballroom, for 100 guests, vendors, board members, half the state's agriculture lobby. My father's kingdom, dressed up for one final bow before he handed the company to Preston. I wore a dress I'd bought for a cousin's wedding 3 years earlier. My mother found me at the door. "You couldn't have gotten something new?" She adjusted her bracelet. "You're at table 19 by the kitchen. Try not to make this about you tonight." Then she was gone before I could answer. Table 19 had a clear view of the stage, past a support column, where a banner read, "Congratulations, Preston Callaway, President and CEO." I noticed a woman near the entrance in a gray suit, holding a leather folder, not mingling, not drinking, just watching the room. Her eyes found mine once, and stayed a beat too long. At 8 o'clock, the lights dimmed. My father took the stage. 40 years ago, my mother, Walter's late wife, used to say this company would only be as strong as the family running it. Applause. Tonight, I'm proud to hand that family legacy to my son. Preston joined him, beaming, and my father announced it all. The presidency, 60% of his personal shares, the lake house. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "And I want to be honest with all of you tonight because family should be honest. Renata's role with the company will be ending next month. It's time she found something that suits her better." 390-something people, and every one of them looked away from table 19. The woman in the gray suit was already walking toward me before the applause even finished. "Ms. Callaway, my name is Diane Vasquez. I was your grandfather's attorney." She set the leather folder on the table. "He left instructions that this be delivered to you on the day your father made your position in this family public and made it clear you weren't included in it." My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside, a will, dated 11 months before he died, notarized, sealed. My grandfather had left me 51% of Callaway Grain and Logistics and a separate irrevocable trust worth $47 million in liquid assets, structured as a single certified check to be released the moment I formally claimed the estate. There was a condition. I had 72 hours to request an emergency shareholders meeting, or the whole bequest reverted to his 2011 will, the one that left everything to my father. I found an empty hallway near the kitchen and read it 3 times, my chest tight enough that I had to lean against the wall. My grandfather hadn't just left me money. He'd left me a weapon and a deadline, so I couldn't talk myself out of using it. That night, back in my apartment, I finally opened the tin box he'd given me in 2019. Inside was a letter in his handwriting and a flash drive. His letter explained everything. In 2017, he'd started noticing the same irregular vendor payments I'd flagged years later on my own, payments to a shell logistics company that, it turned out, funneled money back to an account controlled by my father. He'd never proven it publicly before his death. The flash drive held years of the paperwork he'd quietly gathered. "I couldn't finish this fight, Ren," he wrote. "But I always believed you'd see what I saw, because you already had. Use this to protect the company. Not to punish him. To protect it." I want to pause here for a second. If you've ever sat at a table where everyone celebrated someone else and pretended you weren't there, type still here in the comments. I see you. Now, back to the boardroom. I called Diane Vasquez first thing the next morning. Then I called a name my grandfather's letter had given me. Harold Voss, a longtime board member who'd clashed with my father for years over spending decisions he was never allowed to see the details of. "I've been waiting for someone to finally hand me a reason," he told me. Within a day, he and two other directors had signed the petition for an emergency meeting. My father found out that afternoon. Preston called me within the hour, furious, demanding to know what I'd done. I told him the truth. I hadn't done anything except finally get heard. The board convened 2 days later on the 9th floor. I walked in wearing the same dress from the gala, a second-hand blazer over it, and a flash drive in my pocket. My father tried to have me removed from the room before I even sat down. "She has no standing here, no experience, frankly no head for this kind of thing," until Harold Voss reminded him that as of that morning, I held majority voting shares, which gave me every right in that room he had. I laid it out plainly. The will. Diane confirmed its authenticity on record. Then the flash drive, 5 years of the same shell vendor payments I'd flagged on my own, now cross-referenced with my grandfather's earlier findings and traced to an account under my father's name. The room went quiet in a way I'd never heard a room go quiet before. My father's face lost all its color. Preston stared at the table like it had personally betrayed him. I didn't ask the board to fire my father outright. I asked for a vote of confidence instead. Let the board decide, on the record, whether he kept the role he still held on paper. If he had their trust, nothing I'd found would matter. It didn't. The vote came back 8-3. He had 30 days to resign. He caught me in the hallway afterward, my mother beside him, her mascara already gone. "You've destroyed this family," he said. "I told the truth," I said. "You destroyed it the day you decided which of your kids was worth listening to." I didn't wait for a response. I'd spent 26 years waiting for one. I was done. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and finally telling the truth, hit subscribe, because what happened with my family over the next few months is its own story, and it isn't finished yet. Okay, back to it. My father resigned within the month. The board named Harold Voss interim CEO and offered me a seat as strategic advisor, with full say over any decision touching the parts of the business my grandfather built by hand. I took it. I didn't want to run the company day to day. I wanted it protected. My mother reached out 6 weeks later, asked to meet at a diner, no lawyers, no audience. She apologized, not perfectly, not enough to undo 26 years, but it was real in a way I hadn't expected. "I told myself I was protecting you from disappointment," she said. "I was really just protecting myself from admitting I was wrong about you." It wasn't forgiveness. It was a start. Preston took longer. 3 months, actually, and it happened over coffee he asked for, not me. "I spent my whole life being the proof that Dad's way of measuring people was right," he said. "I never once asked what it cost you to be the proof of the opposite. We're not close. Not yet. But we're talking, which 6 months ago would have seemed impossible." I moved into a small house outside the city that fall, close enough to drive out to my grandfather's old farmhouse on weekends. I kept his kitchen table. I still spread ledgers across it sometimes, out of habit, because it's still the place I think most clearly. The $47 million sits mostly untouched. I used a fraction of it to start a scholarship fund at the community college I graduated from, for students nobody expects much from. Looking back, I understand something now I couldn't have at 25. My grandfather didn't leave the company to me because I was smarter than my brother. He left it to me because I noticed what everyone else was trained not to see, and because he knew that when I found the truth, I'd choose to protect something instead of just winning. Being the dumb one was never a description of me. It was a description of what my family refused to look at closely enough to understand. If you've ever been the one written off in a room full of people who should have known better, I want you to hear this. You don't need a $47 million check to prove your worth. But you're allowed to stop waiting for the people who missed it to finally catch up. If this story meant something to you, subscribe, hit the bell, and tell me in the comments what you were told you'd never be able to do. And if you want more stories about people who finally stopped waiting to be seen, the next one's linked below. Thank you for watching. Until next time.